Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of my podcast, Leading by Example. I am very excited to do this episode today for two reasons. One, this is my first time I'm doing it in English. And the second reason is that the guest that I have today is someone that I have been looking very much forward to having this conversation with today, because he have done some remarkable stuff that we will dive a little bit into, both on the side of what he have achieved, but also the leadership part of it. So, Janus Rostock, welcome to my episode.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And thank you for taking the time out of your busy calendar to be here with me today. I know you have a lot of things going on.
I do indeed, yeah. I have
you.
a very large team, so lots to do.
Very good. And we are both Danish speakers, but we decided to do this, or maybe I decided to do this podcast in English because both of us have a great network of a lot of international people who would not understand if we sat here and spoke in Danish. So this is my first time doing an episode in English. I know you are very used to doing interviews and videos and so on in English, but this is my first time. So I hope I don't say a lot of Danglish or Danish words during this time.
I'm sure we'll manage.
Very
It'll
good,
be
very
fine.
good. So James, why don't you introduce yourself briefly? Who are you and what are you currently doing?
So my name is Janus Rostock. I'm an architect by training. I'm from Copenhagen, Denmark. I moved to the Middle East in 2005 because I wanted to go out and see the world and test what I'm doing, what I've learned in Denmark as an architect on a more global scale. I had done projects around the world before, so I'd been working in overseas destinations, and I thought it'd be really interesting to go out and really try making some larger projects.
Yeah.
So moved to Dubai in 2005, started working for a smaller company where I was the assistant general manager. I'd come from Henning Larsen and KHR in Denmark at the time, so Henning Larsen was around 100 people. KHR was up to, I think we were more than 300 when we were the largest. So in that sense, I've been used to working in fairly large companies. So joining here, it was a small company, 25 people, very different from what I'd been doing, but interesting projects. So these were villas for the sheikhs in Abu Dhabi. I did a palace for a 24-year-old princess, etc. And what that showed me was how different design is in this part of the world, and some of the considerations that you have to do that you're not really aware of when you're living in Denmark and coming from a quite homogeneous country to something which is very heterogeneous in terms of very, very different cultures, lots of cultures mixing, or the opposite, lots of cultures that don't want to mix, and where you have to design for cultures being different and allowing people to have their own culture in their own spaces.
And so right now, what is your current position?
So right now, I'm the vice president responsible for design for AECOM in the Middle East and Africa. So I have master planning, urban design, landscape, architecture and interiors as part of my team. I've also got planners, etc. So a team of around 220 designers sitting in the UAE and Saudi. Yeah. And we're working with our overseas team in India as well. So I think in terms of the people that are influenced by how I operate and how I lead is probably around 350 or something like that.
All right. And how diverse are they, from how many different countries?
So I think the current team is more than 40 different nationalities.
Wow.
So very, very diverse.
Yeah.
Very exciting for me, having lived in a country where there's not that many different cultures. It really opens your eyes to different ways of seeing the world, which I find deeply inspiring. To be honest, It keeps me on my toes in terms of how I communicate, because you have to make sure that the audience is hearing the message you want to give them, and sometimes that means you have to say it in 40 different ways.
Yeah.
And even more.
Yeah.
So that for me is quite quite a challenge, but a really good one.
Yeah, I would love to dive a little bit more into that with the cultural challenges that there might be in your leadership position. But before that, I was quite curious when you said this about the big houses or palaces you've built for these young people here. How are these palaces? What do you experience when you walk into one of those?
So I think, well, first of all, the culture is different. So you've got the close family, you've got the extended family, and you've got your guests and visitors, and you have different spaces for those people. So you have a space which is for your close family, you have a space which is for the extended family, and then you've got the spaces for your visitors. For many, that's segregated, so that men and female are having individual spaces and they're not mixing
Within the one palace
within
one house?
the one building,
Yeah.
within the one palace. You may see that even in smaller villas, where you have that your majalis, where you which is the formal part of the house where you're having guests.
Very interesting.
So very interesting, and for us also, it was all about then the staff. How do you then accommodate staff with different nationalities, etc.
Yeah.
So quite exciting. This was I think about 20,000 square meter building, so
Wow.
quite large.
Yeah.
And
quite different from what we're used to in Denmark.
So quite different from the 120 square meters you would have in Denmark. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Very cool. We are going to go into some of the major projects you've been working on over the past many years. But what I'm very curious about, and what this podcast is about, is leadership and your journey into leadership. Can you recall back to your first leadership position? Which company was that, and how did that happen?
So I think the first real leadership position. So I think being an architect, sometimes you're it's a one-person job. So you're kind of leading the process, leading the client, doing all the work yourself. So you're not really leading anybody. I think the first project where I had real leadership was the Malmö City Tunnel in Sweden, where I was working for KHR. The partner that was responsible for the job was a guy called Nille Juul Sørensen. And this was a major infrastructure project in Sweden. We were to design 2 entrances to an underground regional train station, and we had a client which was Swedish. We had a Swedish collaborating company that we were working with. And I think for me, the biggest surprise there was just 20, 40 kilometers from Copenhagen that you would have people that were very, very different. So in Sweden, you have this consensus culture around decisions, which means that everyone has to be heard. You have to ask them whether they feel heard, etc. And that's how decisions are being made. And once everyone agrees, you move forward.
And how long time does that take for everyone to agree?
And I think what was interesting there was that we did the design of a station, and I think we ended up doing more than 100 different options.
Wow.
And we ended up back at something which was very close to some of the first options we did. But because we've gone through everything, there were no doubters and nobody saying, oh, you could have done this, you could have done that, and tested it. So we tested everything. Everybody saw the pros and the cons for each option. And we ended up with something which I'm certainly very proud of, which I know Malmö is very proud of, and which is a great collaboration between lots of different people.
Yeah. So the Swedish way of leadership, with consensus and so on, what are the pros and cons to that in your view?
Again, I think from a Danish point of view, you might say that it's a slow process. But what's been interesting is that project was constructed within time and budget. Major infrastructure project, which was designed and built within budget. So in that sense, that's a very positive outcome of a process. So we may have taken longer to get to the point where we're saying this is what we're doing. But there were no changes after we kind of said, this is what we're doing. So in that sense, a positive. I'm a little bit impatient as a person. So for me, it was sometimes difficult to just continue going and doing new options. But that's life. At the end of the day, our clients are the ones that are paying the bills. And as long as they're paying the bills and are happy with the process, that's what we got to do.
Yeah, so if they are slow from a Danish point of view, how is it then from a Dubai point of view, where things move even faster, I imagine?
So Middle East is different in many ways. So first of all, decisions are being made by fewer people. Very often you have one decision maker. Challenge here is that you don't necessarily start working with that one decision maker from the beginning. So you're working with people that are interpreting the decisions of a decision maker, and you really only know once you're presenting to the decision makers on whether the project is according to their vision and whether they're buying into what we would have designed as designers. So that's where I think there's a big difference. So you're sometimes second guessing what we think a decision maker would want, but also we're presenting our vision of the world, and that's also what they're asking for. They're asking us to go above and beyond, and come up with ideas that has never been seen before, and where things are done in a new and novel way.
Yeah.
So that's the interest for me in being in this part of the world, is that you're continuously challenged, and in that sense, it's something where there's never a dull moment.
I imagine.
And the time frames are much shorter.
Yeah.
Than what we're used to from a European context.
Yeah, I imagine. I see cranes everywhere when I'm in Dubai. Everything, whenever I'm here with every 6 months or every year, I see new buildings everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's.
But that's not just Dubai. I think that's the entire region. You're seeing the same thing in Saudi Arabia. You're seeing it in Abu Dhabi. You're seeing it or have seen it in Qatar and elsewhere. So that's I think as a playground for an architect, quite unique.
Yeah. So let's go back again to your first leadership position.
Yeah.
So that was when you were working on this project in Malmö. Was that when you, for the first time?
That was the first time that I was the person that was leading it decided to go and do a PhD, and I was then asked by Nille if I wanted to take on this job. So that was the first job where I came from being an architect to being then the project architect. So having to lead the process, talk to the client, and delegating work to other people. And I think for me, the interesting part and the humbling part was that one of the people I was working with was 10 years older than me. He had much more experience than I did. So finding a way to again, delegate the work, but segregating it into the things that needed to be done and by when, etc., was the first really interesting part of that.
So how was it to lead someone that was 10 years older than you?
For me, it was. I mean, I've always liked to decide, but at the same time, what we do, we're knowledge workers. So most of my colleagues are super knowledgeable. And the key to that is, how do you now get the best knowledge out of the people you're working with? So you will very often be working with people that know more than you do. So you've got to understand the principles of what we want to achieve. You've got to set a clear frame for how we're going to be working, because you have the knowledge from the client in terms of what they're aspiring to. But then you also got to let people free to do what they need to do. The challenge in that is making sure that you're then delivering on time and that people are working as a team. So the larger the team, the more challenging it is to have individuals who wants to be putting their mark on it. And I think that's where I started seeing the benefits of co-creation. I think the best projects I've ever worked on have been the ones where you really stand on each other's shoulders to reach a point which you couldn't have reached on your own. And most of what we do in my business, which is architecture, engineering, design, master planning, it's a team effort. It's a team sport, and therefore, yes, you might have the heroes, you might have your goalkeepers and the guys that are in the offensive and scoring the goals, but at the end of the day, it's a team effort.
Yeah, I heard an interview with you where you said something about the star architect is dead.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by it is that for a very long period of time, we've looked at architects as individuals, and so you've got the Norman Fosters, you've got the Henning Larsens, you've got the Zaha Hadids, etc. They represent a style, but at the end of the day, they've set a path, but they're not the ones doing all the drawings. So for me, it was kind of the larger the project gets, the more complex they get, the more multidisciplinary they get, the less it's about the one individual. It's important to have great leaders. And what you can say about most of these people is that they're great leaders because they can get others to follow. But at the end of the day, the reason I'm saying that the star architect was dead is that you're really doing this as a team.
You gotta give credit to the team.
You gotta give credit to the team. I think that's hugely important. And also, it's not just about the architect. And again, sitting in a multidisciplinary consultancy, it's as important that everything else is functioning and it's functioning well. So your structures, your mechanical, electrical, your transport, all of the things that you're doing in a building or in a project are equally important as the architects who might be the ones that are thinking more holistically. So we're kind of conducting, we're telling people to do a bit more of this, a bit less of that. But at the end of the day, it only functions really well. You can do the most beautiful building. If you can't get in, if you're sitting in queue outside, or if the electricity is not working, or if the waiting time in the lifts, etc., are not working, then the experience is not going to be there. So we're kind of creating the framework for life to happen. And then after we leave, people are starting to inhabit them and they change. And that's I think the beautiful thing about buildings is that once the owners or the tenants move in, they take on a different function or a different life than you ever would have imagined. And I've seen that in multiple cases where you envision something, you're aspiring for something, and you're hoping that this is what you're going to get, and then the result is even better because of human ingenuity.
That's very interesting. So let's go back again to this, the first time you had this leadership role. You had someone 10 years older than you. How old were you at that time?
So I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
So mid to late 20s. When I graduated, it took 7 years to become an architect. So you were having very long summer holidays where you'd be working in architectural offices and really getting to understand your trade and the craftsmanship of being an architect. And then after that, you would then graduate and then you would start. I've been super fortunate. So I've had along my career, and I think that's another part of leadership, is that first of all, you've got to have people that trust you to take on the role. They support you and they take chances. They take chances on you and allow you to fail. And I've failed many times in terms of being a leader, but it's about recognizing and quickly getting back on track and saying, okay, well, that wasn't working particularly well. Let's look at a different tack on this.
So when you look back at your leadership journey when you were young, a new leader, do you remember some of the mistakes you made back then?
I've got several mistakes I remember very clearly. I think I've grown up in a home where my mom was a social worker, my father was a lawyer. Yeah. I've grown up in a home where we've been used to having heated discussions about politics, about life, about philosophy, etc. So for us, having discussions was really something that gave everybody energy. So we would argue a lot, and we would have great discussions. That's great when you're in an equal environment and everybody knows that those are the rules you're playing by. Being a son of a lawyer, sometimes the first thing a lawyer would try to do is to be right first time and shut down the opposition. Yeah, and that was something that I learned. And at one point in my career, my boss at the time, Neil Jules Johnson, pulled me aside and he said, "So Janus, you've got lots of great things that you're doing, but when you want to close a discussion, if you're being a little bit impatient, you're basically slamming people up against the wall verbally. I can't have that. So unless you change your style immediately, we can't be working together." So that was a serious wake up call, and I was going, and I didn't recognize it.
Yeah. So you had some of the
time.
traits back from your father.
So I was just doing what I'd seen at home, which was working fine, and which wasn't really a big problem. It was kind of, oh, I got you there. But of course, other people saw it very, very differently. They got really upset, which when I understood that, it made me really sad, because that wasn't the intent. And I got a coach. So
I like hearing that.
So I got a coach, a psychologist, Lena Steffensen, who was coaching people in Danske Bank, etc. So she, and that was a family friend. So we had some sessions together, and her advice to me was to go and talk to the people that I had that I stepped on their toes, and apologize. But apologize properly, yeah? So really say sorry, and allow them to say, and say to them, if you see me doing it again, could you do me a favor and just have a sign that you're now doing this again, so I can stop doing it, because I really don't want to do it. And I was lucky that the people that I had, whose toes I had stepped on, were generous enough to say to me, do you know what, fair enough, we'll help you with that. So in that sense, a really good lesson.
Yeah.
But so it's about taking that feedback in and really listening, and it's about developing your emotional intelligence. At the same time, I started reading Coleman in terms of emotional intelligence at home, at work, etc. So really looking at psychology, really starting to understand what happens chemically in the brain if you're being spoken to with a raised voice, etc., what the body language does, etc. So you really start understanding that it's not just how you say it or what you're saying, it's also your body language, which helps in all of our communication.
Yeah.
And I think those are some of the lessons that I've since then used coming to new cultures, where you really got to be careful, because one thing is that what I could do at home with my family, which I then discovered I couldn't do with my colleagues, then moving to a new country, coming from a country where we're quite direct. I think most people would say, some people would say Danes are rude because we just say things as we see them.
Yeah.
And in many cultures that's considered rude. So really trying to look at that and saying, okay, so I'm now in a foreign country. I'm surrounded by, in this instance, more than 40 different nationalities and cultures, etc. You really, really got to be careful around how you communicate. You really got to be asking some open questions before making statements, etc., to understand context.
Yeah.
And that helps, of course, dealing with team members, dealing with large groups of people, getting people to collaborate and creating a safe environment for co-creation, because that's the other thing, is that doesn't really matter who comes with the good ideas if they're good enough. So how do you now break down hierarchy, which we may think, oh, there's no hierarchy, we're all equal. But in the world around us, very often that hierarchy is there, and you've got to find a way to invite people in and allow them to feel safe and secure. So that's part of the leadership I think I'm seeing now in this part of the world, is making sure that you get to that point where you can get people to speak the same language.
Yeah.
So, and then also feel that it's safe for them to step forward with ideas, even the ones that don't get chosen. So not bad ideas, just the ideas that don't get chosen.
Yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. I mean, there are so many different cultural aspects of working. And I remember also when I was leading a team in my previous company I was working for, I had also 17 different nationalities. And that was at Danfoss, a big Danish company. And doing their onboarding week, we would gather all of these graduates in a team, and there would be 15 or 20 young graduates starting their career with Danfoss, and we would invite the CEO, and the Danish, they would ask him questions and challenge him on why don't we have more diversity in the top leadership? When we talk about we want diversity in the top leadership. And I remember my colleagues from just South Europe or from Asia, even from the US, they were just in shock. How can you ask the big CEO these questions? How can you challenge him like that? Yep. So that was a very big culture shock for those people coming to Denmark and seeing that we would just ask the CEO a question like he was just any other person in the company. Yeah. How is that different here?
I think you have to tease it out. I don't think I think the challenge often, the higher up in the hierarchy you get, the less straight answers you get. I think the less honesty you get in terms of people, it's very difficult to get them to tell you what they really feel. Yeah. So I think I'm not sure I found the answer to it. I'm continuously trying, because it is important. It is important that we know what we do and how it impacts people around us, and how we get them to engage in change, because there's so much change going on right now. We need to make sure that we follow, and that we get the best out of our people, and make sure that they have a meaningful life and a great place to work. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. What we do is we're a people business. So if we're not able to attract and retain the right talent, the right people, we really struggle. So it's deeply necessary for us.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So early in your career, with this experience you had, you learned it's not about winning arguments as a leader, right? It's about listening and asking questions and understanding. Yeah. When do you feel that you went on from leading, a small team to suddenly you saw yourself in a bigger leadership position where you were suddenly leading many different people, even maybe many different teams? When was the change for you?
I think it was a gradual change. I think I started out doing building projects, and then I moved into master planning. Master planning is much more multidisciplinary. So in buildings, you might be working with an engineering team and an architecture team together on something quite specific. Master plans becomes more complex, much more stakeholders, much more elements to consider.
And just for the audience that are not in the industry, master plan, what does that mean?
So master plan is when you move from a single building or a single complex of buildings to large-scale plans where you may have multiple buildings, multiple uses, and where the area becomes larger. So, and if you look at it, so I've done regional master plans which were tens of thousands of square kilometers. Yeah, we've worked on projects when we started out on NEOM competition in the early days, it was 27,000 square kilometers. It's the size of Belgium. So that's the one end of the spectrum. And then been working on building, which is a toilet block, which is maybe 20 square meters or less. So I think in that sense, what we do ranges a lot, but the complexity increases, of course. Also the duration of the project. Normally a building takes a year to design and then 2-3 years to build, depending on the scale of it. Some master plans take 1 to 2 years to design, and then they take 40 years to be built. So there you're creating a framework for buildings to come in the future, but still it has to have an identity. So I think that was where I started to get more into the multidisciplinary nature, also starting working with people that are very different to most architects. So I think that has also been interesting in terms of moving from working in a monodisciplinary way, where we might have our differences, etc. But once you're moving into a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary organization, it changes a lot.
Yeah. So you both have more people to manage, but you also have more different stakeholders too.
Many more different stakeholders, yes.
Yeah.
So, and then on top of that, I think very often, so what we often do is, apart from, because we're very professional, we're working with clients. So we meet a client, they give us a brief, and then we have to deliver that. In this part of the world, they often come to an architect to lead a project, and they hold you personally accountable for delivering on their vision. And that means that you're at their beck and call 24/7, and you are expected to deliver on the promise. So it's super flattering in many ways, but also very scary, because you got to make sure you're delivering, and you got to make sure that you bring the team along.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the repeat customers come when they've had the full service from everyone, and that we're delivering on a vision which is better than what they had hoped for to start with.
All right. So when you moved to Dubai, you mentioned you started in a smaller company, right? And
started in a smaller company, was there for a year.
Yeah.
And after a little over a year, I did more than 20 concepts. I decided that there was time, only a few of them got built. This was in 2005, when a fifth of all the world's cranes were in Dubai. So decided maybe it was time for me to move on. And then I moved to Atkins, which is a big British architecture engineering company in the Middle East. Atkins is known for its architecture and architecturally led design. So this is Dubai Metro, the Burj Al Arab. I designed led the design of the Dubai Opera. Many projects were done. I was 12 years with Atkins. Started in the Middle East, moved back to Denmark, opened Atkins and Architecture and Design in Copenhagen. Did that for 3 years. That was in 2008 during the financial crisis.
That's a good time.
So moved to Denmark in April. Everything was great. I was given 350,000 square meters of office buildings to be designed in Dubai. Grew a team, worked on it, delivered, and then in November, the whole world came crashing down.
Yeah, and that affected your industry.
That was our industry in particular. Again, for in the construction industry, usually it's the last thing that starts when things are going up, because people want to make sure that there's enough money around, and it's the first thing you stop. So our cycles are a little bit harder than others. But I think for me, making that transition, moving back to Denmark, etc., was a great experience. Again, working with back in the Danish environment, trying to work with the Danish engineers who hadn't had architects before, and therefore, of course, there were several concerns around what would that mean, etc. So working with the team there, set up the vision for how we could coexist without them feeling threatened or the team there losing work because of an architect coming in to their business.
Yeah.
Did that for 3 years, and then we very quickly, when all the projects stopped in Dubai, parts of the challenge then is, of course, you had to let some people go, which is never a pleasant thing. It's super disruptive for people's lives, and many of these people are people you consider friends. So very, very difficult to be in that situation. But at the same time, I remember myself being let go twice when I was working for Henning Larsen, not because
From the same company.
From the same company.
Yeah.
Not because I didn't perform,
they took
at least
you back.
so they said, but really because those were the times.
Yeah.
There was work and there was no work. So and when there's no work, of course, they can't keep everyone. And I was reasonably young at the time, and therefore there were more experienced people that they wanted to hold on to.
Yeah.
So So for me, I think I started traveling a lot. So I traveled more than 120 days a year during the financial crisis, and I started going to places which are very foreign. So it was.
And that was when you were based in Denmark.
That was when I was based in Denmark. So
Yeah.
that was at that time Iran was open for business for a short period of time. I went to Iran, I went to Syria, I went to Azerbaijan, went to Angola, Kenya, and worked with some very interesting people. Worked in Saudi, so lots of alpha males having countries named after them, which was very, very interesting. But I think maybe in what you said about the Danish culture, about just seeing people as people and then asking open questions and maybe challenging them a little bit helped me then, because I'll usually go in and meet some of these people and trying to get us to a position where we would either win some work or recover a situation which was difficult.
Yeah, and you had a time, I see in your resume, where you went back to Denmark for a few years.
Yeah.
Leading signal
Yes,
architecture, right?
signal architecture.
So how was it to be working in this culture, this environment here, and then suddenly go back to Denmark again and working with more Danish culture?
I think for me, what I've if you look through my career, I've tried to make a change every 3 years. So somehow by luck or by crook, I don't know, I've managed to make these changes about every 3 years. So get into a position, you work through the position, you start to really understand what it's all about, and then maybe my impatience means that I need to do something different. And I've been fortunate enough to be in large companies where there's room for growth and where there's room to do different things. So if you look at Atkins, I was first leading. I was starting master planning in Dubai. I moved back to Denmark. I set up Atkins Architecture and Design in Copenhagen. I then moved back to Dubai and worked on these great projects. So delivered the Dubai Opera, etc. Ended up leading both architecture and master planning for Atkins in the Middle East. Did that for almost 3 years. Then moved to AECOM, where I was leading then their master planning business, which at the time was 70. We grew it to 90. Did that for 3 years. Then I was headhunted to work for Signal.
Yeah.
Moved to Denmark to work for Signal. Did that for 2 years, and then moved back to the Middle East. So tried to stay in the same job for 3 years. Signal was a little bit shorter, but that was for different reasons. I think we, as a family,
you missed the heat.
We'd been away. We've been away for a long time. My wife has been living in the US 12 years before we moved to Dubai first time. So in that sense, she's probably lived longer outside of Denmark than in Denmark.
Yeah.
And therefore, as a family, we really loved it here and thrived and decided that it was time to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the most difficult thing for a leader, the biggest challenge that you face as a leader?
I don't think there's one challenge. I think it's continuously challenging. I don't think there's a day where there's not a new challenge I need to deal with. So I think as a leader, you gotta be comfortable in uncertainty. You gotta be comfortable in not knowing what tomorrow brings, and you gotta make sure that you have good people around you. And I think those are the things that first of all, there's the personal thing. You've got to be comfortable in that situation, but at the same time, you're only a leader if you're having people following you or working with you to help you deliver on a promise. And the larger the team, the more challenging it becomes. The more time you have to make sure to spend with your people. So it's finding that balance between introvert facing, inward facing in the company, extrovert facing, talking to clients, operational focus on one side, strategic focus on the other side. So I think it's that balance of doing those four things continuously, and then at certain periods focus on one thing, to focus a little less on the other things, to make sure that you're continuously moving forwards, that you're continuously evolving, that you've got your people with you, that you understand your clients and your markets, etc. So I think those are the challenges that you have as a leader today, and that's no matter whether you're a 10-person business or whether you're a 10,000-person business.
Yeah. And how big is your current organization? You're around 200-300 people now?
So as I said, the team I'm working with is in terms of the direct is around 220, about 340 with our India business as well in terms of the architects or landscape architects that are sitting there. But AECOM overall is around 50,000.
Yeah, it's a big company.
So we are a large company.
Yeah. But where you are now in your career is you are obviously, with so many people, you are leading leaders. I imagine you don't have 220 direct reports.
No, true.
That would be a lot of time to spend with colleagues. What is the difference you see in going from leading people to suddenly leading leaders? That's another step in a career.
It is another step, and again, I think the focus has to be on the strategic side, because I don't know a lot of leaders that like to be micromanaged. I think most leaders wants to lead, and so for me, it's really working with the leadership team to create a common strategy for us, a way forward. To agree on what we're doing and what we're not doing. And that's, especially in this part of the world and in our business, it's really important to be clear on what it is we're doing and what it is we're not doing. Because if not, you could be misled or led down a path that's not the right for the business. So that's parts of what we do. But then I think it's also the whole the coaching and the mentoring. It's actually being there and helping the leaders lead, helping the leaders overcome challenges, being the sounding board, maybe sometimes just being the mirror you hold up and repeat back to them what they've just told you, to see if they can come up with the answer themselves to some of their challenges.
That's basically coaching, right?
So it's the coaching side of it.
And how much time do you spend in, with your people, developing your leaders and focusing on them versus the other things you also have to do?
I think after I came back, I spent quite a lot of time because I came back to a different role in the business. I came back to a different team. So when I left, we'd grown from 70 to 90. In the 2 years I was away, that one team grew to 150. which is now more than 160. And on top of that, I got the whole architecture team. So it was really, and in the meantime, there'd been a lot of changes in the architecture team. So it was new people I had to get to know, to understand, etc., to build that culture.
So you spend a lot of time with the leaders.
So I spend a lot of time with the leaders to really agree on what we're doing, etc., and to weed out behaviors that are counterproductive. So because I think that's really important. If you want to create an environment for collaboration, you've got to make sure that there is no internal blaming, etc. So those are some of the things that you need to look at, and as you know, that takes time. Because you've got to display the behavior, you've got to catch it when you see it. You've got to find a way to not correct it, but in a way which is not a blame game. So saying
the constructive feedback,
feedback, and saying, how could we do this differently? Have you considered how that might feel when you're sitting opposite, etc. So those are some of the things, and then dealing with clients that are then maybe not satisfied with what they're getting, or just making sure that they're continuously satisfied.
So you also face clients.
That's part of the role. And that's expected.
And how much do you actually now work on designing and doing the architect stuff?
Very little. Very, very little.
Been there, done that, or do you miss it sometimes?
I don't think it ever leaves me. I mean, I trained as an architect, so it's something which I'm passionate about. I still look for architecture when I'm traveling, etc. But I think design can manifest itself in different ways. So now I'm designing leadership. So it's through design thinking processes that we're doing strategies, etc. So I don't think that I've left behind the things I love in terms of creating concepts and delivering, etc., and getting people to help delivering that. But in terms of being the hand that draws it, not anymore. Not right now. No.
That might come again later in the future.
You never know. I've met people that have pivoted, etc. The person I spoke about earlier was that came and that was older than me, had been managing director for an architecture company, but decided he wanted to design again. So I don't think that
you never know what happens.
You never know what happens. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy with leading people and succeeding through others, rather than being the one having to draw all the lines, etc.
So what do you look for now when you are hiring either a leader or maybe promoting someone to become a leader, reporting directly to you? What are you looking for?
I am looking for team players. I'm looking for people that have... I'm looking for talent, of course, in terms of what we do. We need to make sure that we're putting talented people in front of our clients. Also because I think as knowledge workers, as designers, many of these people want to have people to look up to. I think it's important to have heroes. I think it is important to have those beacons that you're looking at and saying, here's somebody that really knows what they're doing. They have a great talent, which means that people want to work with them. So those are some of the things. Sometimes that contradicts. Sometimes it makes it difficult to, and they may not be the best of leaders. Then the question is, how do you then support the great designers to make sure that there are people that can do the things that are their blind spots? So I think it's all the time a continuous course correction in terms of just saying, how do we get there with the people we've got, and how do we now ensure that we're delivering a great product in terms of design? How do we ensure that we have some people that are behaving in the right way, so that they're not stepping on people to get to the success, and how do we now ensure that they are collaborating? Because at the end of the day, we need full collaboration to deliver, because we're working on tight budgets, we're working on short deadlines, and we're working with very, very demanding clients. So if you don't have each other's backs internally, it's really, really difficult, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
And you've got to have fun. You've got to have a team where it's fun to do what you do.
Definitely.
There will be those times where it's tough.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're doing it together as a team. You're succeeding as a team. You're failing as a team.
Yeah. So talking about heroes and someone to look up to, you yourself, I know you don't want to talk about the star architect, but you have done some quite amazing stuff and doing your career. I was actually by the Dubai Opera yesterday. I actually went in and asked if I could get a tour, but he said, no, we're actually closing now and so on. But it's a beautiful, beautiful building.
Thank you very much.
Really, really impressive.
Yeah.
That must also give you some kind of status that you also have to live up to, right? You say this, there's a famous phrase, don't meet your hero. But you are, in a sense, right, a hero architect, a star architect. You have done some amazing things. How does that affect your position as a leader in a company?
I think it's never a disadvantage to have done a building like that, or have led a project like that. There are a number of really exciting projects that I've worked on in this region, which I'm very proud of. I don't know whether it's imposter syndrome or whether it's just humility or what. I try and meet people at eye level. I think at the end of the day, we're only as good as our last project, and I've been lucky. I've been super lucky. I'm really fortunate that I've been at the right place at the right time for many of these projects, and I've always had good people around me that would allow me to deliver. Or allow us to deliver. I think maybe that's the key here, is that, and I said that before, it's not about the individual, it's about that space that you're creating, it's about that ethos you're working along. That makes the difference.
And what has been the biggest challenge in designing and the opera house in Dubai?
The opera has been challenging in many different ways. I mean, it was designed during a time where there was a bit of a slowdown in Dubai. It started out in a different way than you would typically imagine, in terms of, it was a review of a building that turned into a master plan that turned into a building. So in that sense, it was not your typical approach to how to win a building like that. So
how was it decided that you would be the one to design this? I mean, how was the feeling when suddenly you were sitting there and, okay, I'm actually doing this big project?
Again, I think Dubai Opera is very much co-creation, and I've said that many times.
But still,
I'm getting a lot of credit for it, but it is a co-creation project.
Yeah.
There were many people. We were more than 80 people working on that project. Wow. So I was leading it. I was maybe the one helping to reduce the clutter, because, as I mentioned before, when you're dealing with designers, lots of ideas are coming up, and it's more around, and again, maybe that's the Danish background, is about removing the noise to get to the purity as much as you can. But there were inputs from Alaba, His Excellency Mohammed Alaba, who was the chairman of EMA. There were lots of different people that had feedback for that project. So in that sense, it's as I said, it's a co-creation project.
So having been part of the team that have designed the opera house in Dubai, what do you feel when you walk by it and you see it standing there?
Well, I'm incredibly proud. I'm happy not just because of the building, but I'm happy because of what the building does. I think culture is a really, really important part of making any city livable and making any city a success and a destination. So having created a cultural building is important. It's one of the first publicly accessible buildings which has a great deal of transparency. You walk in at eye level. It's a building that you see at eye level. It's not a building you're seeing from the sky. And I think that for me was an important part of this. And it's a low-rise building in a high-rise environment.
Yeah.
So in that sense, something really great. But there are tons of things around it. I think it's the whole idea that it's pedestrian friendly.
Yeah. I was walking around it.
You can walk around it. I think you've got great natural environment in terms of shade during the day. You've got natural breeze coming in, cooling the outdoor space, extending the season. There are many, many things that makes it really, really good. And it's been interesting to work on it. And there's been many different companies involved in it, but the vision overall is being delivered, which is fantastic.
Yeah. That's amazing. So, during your career, who have you been looking for leadership advice or leadership inspiration, for example?
I've had many mentors in my life. So started out with my professor at the Royal Academy, Mogens Bein, who was leading the department, and I learned a lot from him. Moving on, Per Teilgaard, who was then with Henning Larsen, he got me a job with Henning Larsen. You've got Jan Sondergaard, Nila Jules Sørensen. You've got lots of people. Then moving to Middle East, Dubai. Sean Killer is one I've worked very closely with, who was my boss when I came here. He was the one offering me a job at Atkins. Richard Barrett was another guy who then got me to Denmark. Troels Bjerg at ISS was my chairman of the board for when I was at Signal, so really, really sharp.
Yeah.
And then Mario Picheri, who's my current boss, and Hamid. Both really inspiring and people I can come and talk to when I need advice, and I can look for inspiration in terms of how they're dealing with situations. So in that sense, I've been super fortunate. I probably forgot a few people as well. That I've been really, really fortunate in my career that I've been having lots of people that wanted to help me.
Yeah,
I've been lucky to have some team members that have always been supportive.
and so how important is it to have mentors around you growing up?
I think it's incredibly important because it allows you to be, how should I put it? I think it allows you to be the one that doesn't know. I think as a leader, very often you feel that you're expected to know.
Yeah.
The people may not expect it of you, but at some point decisions are going to be made, etc. And so if you are in doubt, having that peer or superior that you can test things out with and saying, what do you think of these? These are my thoughts. What do you think about that? I think that's incredibly rewarding, and it gives you something very different. Not having that is very lonely.
Yeah.
So I think as a leader, it's incredibly important to have those people that you trust, where you've got that ability and relationship to be open and ask open questions and not necessarily having the answer right away.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at someone young who is transitioning into a leadership role or who have ambitions to become a leader, what would be some of your advices for this person?
I think first of all, don't be too hard on yourself. Because I think very often ambition can make us want to run before we can actually walk. So I think for me, it's going with the flow, and it's growing slowly, so that you really get to understand the tricks of the trade, or the mechanisms that are at play. I would also say try and find organizations that are not too political,
Yes.
because it's really difficult to be in organizations where there's lots of internal politics. It's waste of energy. It's sometimes necessary. You've got to be able to deal with it. But if you want to grow as a leader, I think growing in an organization where it's more around people cheering you on than trying to hold you back, it's a very, very different dynamics.
Yeah.
So if you are in organizations where that's not happening, maybe you should look for something else.
That's a good advice. And I imagine that having you here in this studio, there might also be a few architects out there, also young aspiring architects. What would be some of your advice to the young architects coming in the world now, in the professional world?
I think patience is a virtue. And I think what we do, I always looked at Frank Lloyd Wright, who was an American architect, very, very successful at a young age. He then completely disappeared from the face of the earth in terms of doing anything important. And then at the age of, I think it was 73, he designed Falling Water, which is probably one of the best buildings in the world. So knowing that, although you can always come back and you only get better with age, I think is important. And then I think it's important to make sure that you're not falling for instant gratification. This instant recognition that you're wanting, you want your thumbs up, etc., very, very quickly. It's really difficult. Being an architect is about rejection on rejection on rejection. There are I think if I look at how many projects I've done in my life, I've probably done 90% of them never get built. 90% of the ideas that you put forward are being rejected.
That's a tough game.
Or not chosen. Same thing, but very different outlook. Yeah, one is being rejected, the other one is being not chosen.
Which one is worse?
I think the rejection is difficult, of course. Why can't they see the genius of what's in front of them? But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that taste is different, and that you're constructing, you're designing maybe for yourself, but you're actually designing for an audience. You're designing for a user, and it is important that that user understands what they're getting, and they want what we're giving them. Or they want to adopt what we're giving them. So a lot of what we do is generating great ideas, but also selling them. So, and that takes time. It takes time to get to that point where you're able to distill an idea into something which you can explain in a very short period of time, which is so simple that everybody recognizes that this is new and unique, and something you absolutely have to do. So not sure I'm helping them, but it is, for me, I think it is patience. It's
and don't look for instant gratification.
And it's a lot of hard work. I mean, it is the 10,000 hours that creates excellence is really important here. Training your backhand for 45 minutes and not thinking about what it is you're doing, about every single movement, etc. It's the same in what we do. We've got to be deliberate. When you're trying to become better, you've got to be deliberate about everything you're doing. So,
All right. So if I ask your leadership team to describe your leadership style, what do you think they would say?
What would they say? Hopefully that I'm inclusive, that I allow people space to do what they do. That would be important for me, because I think that's the way I like to be led. So that I think that's what I would be hoping for.
All right. I see we are running out of time. So at the end of my podcast, I always ask the leaders if there is someone out there in the market, a leader that you think could be very cool to have in my podcast as a guest, someone that is an inspiration maybe to someone.
Yes, I've been thinking a lot about that.
Yeah.
Does it have to be a Dane?
No, not at all.
I think, and it might be high flying, but I think Jakob Orup Andersen is
From Carlsberg.
Yeah.
I've actually been in dialogue with him.
So I think Jakob has done incredibly well.
Yeah.
And again, it's all about the network, etc. He's done really well to get to where he is. So that could be one.
He seems like a very cool guy. I've actually been sitting with some different groups of friends speaking about, who could be potential guests in my podcast. And his name always pops up.
Yeah.
So maybe in 2025, I might have him as my guest in my podcast. But Janus, thank you so much for taking time to be here with me in my podcast. I'm very honored to talk to you and to listen to your story. And I'm very sure that you have inspired a lot of the listeners also with sharing your leadership journey. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.